it's a great privilege, pleasure, and great reminiscing with my good friend, Kenny Albert. And Kenny, welcome to NHL Wraparound, and thank you for coming on with Vic and myself.
Thanks, Neil. Thanks, Vic. It's great to see you guys. It's been a while and an honor to join the show.
Well, we want to acknowledge, first of all, something that I didn't know existed, to be honest with you. If I'm fully let you know the truth, you have been inducted, or you're going to be inducted into the 2025 National Jewish Sports Hall of Fame. And we congratulate you on that. That is quite an honor.
Well, I appreciate it, Neil. Certainly a huge honor. Just found out about it last week. And there are some great names, many of whom you know, that have been inducted in past years. So a big honor to be included on that list here in 2025.
And where is the induction going to be?
It's out on Long Island. The actual Hall of Fame is located in Commack, Long Island. So I don't have the exact date yet, but that's where it will take place.
Well, that's great, and that's it. It really is well deserved on your part, and you've had such a great career. And I know Vic and I were reminiscing before we got on here about getting to know you in those early years, and it seems like just yesterday that we were sitting around in the Madison Square Garden press room after Ranger games. I was scouting for the Islanders, and you were there with your mom and dad after your dad had done radio for the Rangers, and those were great, innocent days for all of us. But let's move on to today, since that's what most people probably want to hear about and listen to on this podcast. Kenny, you've done a lot of the NHL this season, and what are the things that you either didn't see coming or sort of have surprised you by this point in the NHL season?
Well, I think, Neil, the two biggest surprises team-wise are probably Washington and Winnipeg, who have had great seasons so far. I remember doing that Washington Rangers playoff series last year, and for a number of years now, we've looked at teams like Pittsburgh and Washington who had such great runs, Pittsburgh winning the back-to-back cups in 16 and 17, and then Washington winning in 2018. And we see some of their Hall of Fame caliber players get older, and you wonder when the end was going to come, as far as being a consistent perennial playoff team. And Washington in that playoff series last year, now they fought hard to get in, right? Not a lot of people expected them over those last couple of weeks to be in the playoffs. And it came down to those last couple of days with Philly and Detroit and Washington and a couple of other teams. But in that Rangers series, and again, you have to give a lot of credit to the Rangers and how they played, but Washington just looked tired and old and slow. But they retooled. They brought in, some key players during the offseason, Dubois and Chychrun and a couple of others. And, you look at the amazing season that Ovechkin has had, and you have to give their coach, Spencer Carberry, a lot of credit. I've been really impressed with what he's done, both last year and this year. So Washington for sure in the East. And Winnipeg, Scott Arniel's a guy that I got to know when he was an assistant coach with the Rangers. He's a great guy, had a head coaching opportunity in Columbus, and then was a longtime assistant in a few places, and takes over in Winnipeg where he played. And, they're a team that not a lot of people on the East Coast really pay attention to. You don't see a lot of their games, but they've had tremendous goaltending from Hellebuck, and they have some terrific players. And I think out West, they would have to be the surprise team so far, along with Washington in the East.
How about on the flip side in terms of disappointments and teams and or players that have pulled up short of what you thought they might deliver this year?
It's funny, Vic. I was thinking about, heading into the season, there are certain teams the last 2 or 3 years you thought were on the rise: Detroit, Ottawa, Buffalo, and they didn't necessarily get off to great starts. But then when you look at what Detroit and Ottawa in particular have been able to do as of late, I think they've kind of turned the tide. Teams that look like they might be disappointments, but with Todd McLellan coming in, and they have a terrific record since he took over, Ottawa finally seems to have gotten to that next level as far as challenging for a playoff spot. There's still a lot of time left. So teams that, you think might have been disappointments. Even Montreal, rough start, and then they had a great stretch, and they're right in that mix as well. I've been impressed with Pittsburgh. You look at what they did without Crosby and Malkin last week in a couple of games leading up to the break. So there aren't many teams really out of it at this point with the 3-point games and still 25, 26 games remaining. I think it'll be a terrific last third of the season. The teams now have a bit of a break. You have 100 players or so taking part in the Four Nations, but the other players in the league get to sort of refresh over the next week or so, have some time off, and get recharged. And we'll see what kind of an effect that has heading into the final 5 or 6 weeks of the regular season.
Kenny, I was lucky enough to do color commentary with you one night. I can't remember exactly where we were.
We were at Joe Louis in Detroit.
Yeah. I just remember that I got to do color with all my favorite people. And that's, I'm not saying that to be funny. I'm saying it to be honest. I got to do a game with you, a game with Sam, a game with Mike Emmerich, and many others that were really a lot of fun to do games with. As I'm sitting there, I'm going, who'd have ever thought that this would happen? That I'd end up being president GM of the Rangers. We win the cup, and now here I am doing hockey. But tell me, because I've had to prepare for games as the color analyst, and I've had to prepare for national games. I never prepared for a local game because I never did local teams. And I know it's a lot easier when you're a local guy because you know your team, and you just have to prepare for the visitors or the home road team, the home other team. What do you ever get to a game at this point in your career and go, holy moly, I don't know these two teams. I'm going to have to stay in my room all day today because I got to really work on these two teams.
Yeah, fortunately, I guess that's never really happened because I'm an over-preparer. I tend to do even more than you probably need to. But it does get to the point as the years move along, you learn certain tricks of the trade and what to do and what not to do. And that was so much fun working that game with you. I think that was on Versus, right? Versus or the OLN, the Outdoor Life Network. The precursor to NBC, and we worked that game in Detroit that night. I could probably find my game sheet. I keep all of my sheets. I forget who the opponent was, but I could pull it out. I have this file cabinet to my left with all of them. Neil, you would love looking through some of this stuff. I don't know if you remember this. I was on the call for NHL Radio in '94 during the final, and I just was looking through those sheets recently. This is a crazy story. So, as you guys know, I grew up as a Vancouver Canucks fan, but I was also a Rangers fan, obviously. And I was working in Washington doing the Capitals home games on cable in 92, 93, 94, 95. And I'm also working at a radio station, WTOP in Washington. And it's during the conference final. You guys are playing the Devils in that unbelievable series. And Howie Rose, another good friend of ours, Neil, Howie and Mike Keenan, believe it or not, had done the 93 final on NHL Radio, Los Angeles and Montreal. Howie and Mike were the broadcast team. And Greg Baldinger at the NHL, he was running NHL Radio at the time. 94, you guys, the Rangers are in the conference final. Howie was supposed to do the NHL Radio in the final. But all of a sudden, if the Rangers got there, Howie would be unavailable due to his local duties. So I get a call, I think the day of game 3 of the Rangers-Devils series. If the Rangers make it to the final and Howie's unavailable, would you be interested in working? What kind of a question is that? I'm 26 years old. Of course I'd be interested. And as it turns out, it's the Rangers and Canucks, my two favorite teams. And I had the opportunity to call that final with Sherry Ross on NHL Radio. Both Howie and Mike Keenan were a little busy during that stretch after working the 93 final. But as far as the preparation, and I've been so fortunate to be involved in all 4 of the major sports. Hockey and football are the ones that I've done the most, that I'm most identified with. I've also done basketball and baseball through the years. The preparation, to me, for the different sports is similar, but also different as far as the time that you spend. During football, it's probably 20 to 30 hours a week between the preparation that I'm doing on my own, and then when we go in on Fridays and Saturdays and go to practices and meet with players and coaches and have our production meetings. Each team only plays 1 game a week in the NFL, so every game's so big. And they're all national games, so you might have a team week 16 that you haven't seen all season. So you have to catch up on their entire season. Hockey is a little different because the teams are playing 3 or 4 games a week. We're all watching games. We're reading. We're paying attention to it. So when I'm doing a Rangers game on radio, Neil, it's not nearly as much preparation as football or as one of the national hockey games. I know the Rangers like the back of my hand. I don't have to do that much preparation. You're still going to practice and talking to guys and listening to the coach. And I'm doing a lot of reading, reading every article that's out there because you never know when you might pick up that little tidbit. And I'll give you an example in a minute on that. But you're studying the other team. You're watching their previous game if you can. You're reading. I usually try to read like a week's worth of articles leading up to the game, with regard to the opponent. But it's so much different. There's so much information available now, right? Back in the day when I started with the Baltimore Skipjacks of the AHL and then the Washington Capitals, the internet didn't exist back then. There was no internet. There were no cell phones. So I was reading weekly publications, newspapers. We would have articles faxed to us sometimes, by the PR staff. So it was a lot different those days. Now with the click of a button, you can read anything. For the national games that I do on TNT with Eddie Olczyk and Brian Boucher, I'll usually I'll read a week's worth of articles involving both teams. I'll try to watch their previous game. We'll get in there. We'll talk to the coaches, go to practice, etc. But a story about, sometimes things just work out, right? You get lucky with preparation and just things I have a lot of useless information up here, as you guys both do as well. I've known you both for a long time. So last Wednesday, I'm doing the game on TNT, the Rangers and Bruins at the Garden, right? And the day before, Craig Laughlin, a longtime color analyst for the Capitals, played for Washington, my former partner back in the 90s. He actually had open heart surgery the day before. So I wanted to wish Locker well on the air. We had a picture of a tweet that the Capitals had put out with Alex Ovechkin wearing a Locker Strong T-shirt. So I had mentioned to our producer the day before, hey, I'd love to send Craig well wishes on the game if we can. Can we have the picture of Ovi ready wearing the Locker T-shirt? So sure enough, in the third period, during a commercial, I said to the producer, hey, if we're not doing anything else here, might be a good time to send the well wishes to Craig. So I do that on the air. And sure enough, something just goes off in my head. I look down at the ice and I see Zach Jones, who had been a scratch for 18 consecutive games for the Rangers, the young defenseman. So he's playing for the first time in 2 months, and he's on the ice. And all of a sudden it registers with me that Zach Jones' father was the equipment manager for the Richmond Renegades of the ECHL. Craig Laughlin owned the team with Rod Langway. And that's where Zach Jones learned how to skate. So all of a sudden there was this tie-in just by accident. He happened to be playing and he happened to be on the ice. But that's an example of just preparation and things that you learn through the years by talking to people. So much of it, as you guys know, is just the schmoozing that goes on at the morning skates. And you pick up little tidbits of information there as well. So that's an example of kind of turning something that in your mind into a moment that really works well on television. But no, you're right, Neil. The preparation for a local game is so much different than a national game. And also, I go back and forth between radio with the Rangers and then TV, and it's a much different call. You have to be so descriptive on the radio. You have to give the time and score a lot more often, but also try to allow for your color analysts to come in at key moments. And I get to work with the great Dave Maloney, the former captain of the Rangers. It's our 20th season together. And, there's not as much time on the radio to get those stories in, right? Because you're calling the game. You're calling the action for most of the time. And then Dave's coming in with his analysis. On TV, when I'm with Eddie Olczyk, for example, there's more time for him to talk during the play if it's in the neutral zone, if not much is going on. So it's definitely different from that perspective, TV versus radio.
A follow-up to that is that when you were with the Skipjacks, what year would that have been?
90-91 and 91-92.
Okay, so I was already with the Rangers because I used to run Adirondack Red Wings, and of course we played against the Skipjacks in that little square building that they played in.
With the stage on the one end.
the stage on the one end, just like in Rochester with the Americans. Last comment was, I think I enjoy trivia and I enjoy these pieces of useless information that I have, and I have millions of them too. But I think you have to be somebody who loves to have attention to very slight detail to be like that. And I drive all my friends and family nuts with that kind of stuff, because I'll say to them, oh, that sign wasn't there yesterday when we drove by here, and that's changed. And the guy's wearing a different helmet tonight. He doesn't wear a CCM helmet. He usually wears a Jofa. And they'll go like, what? What are you talking about? And things like that. So I'm sure your brain works the same way.
Oh, and I remember when we were together with the Rangers, we'd be at a morning skate, for example, and you would notice things, whether it was a banner in the arena, a retired number banner that wasn't there the previous time. It was incredible, Vic. Neil would he had this sixth sense to notice things like that back in the day.
And that he said sixth, not sick.
Well, sixth and sixth. But I think our minds work in a pretty similar way.
Yeah.
We'll see what the transcript looks like when it comes out, sick or sixth. But Kenny, in October of 2023, you released your autobiography, A Mike for All Seasons. And I want to go back and just hit on a couple of more. Here we go. And we see it over Kenny's left shoulder as well.
The audiobook has just been released for those of you who might have some time to kill in the car.
Wow. You know what? Not only that, but those of us that can't read will enjoy that as well.
Kenny, a couple of questions here that I wanted to ask you. Obviously, your dad is and always will be a legend. I grew up listening to him. So many of us that wanted to break into sportscasting, he was the model. He was the mold. And aside from your dad, though, you had two uncles, Al and Steve, that were also in the industry. But besides your immediate family, which sportscaster did you listen to growing up, and maybe as your career was developing, was the most influential in the success that you have now enjoyed?
There were many of them, but aside from family members, as you mentioned, and I often felt when my uncles would come to our house when I was a youngster, we'd all be sitting around the table and my father and my uncles would be telling stories. And I felt like I was listening to the first all sports radio station. It was just great to soak it all in and learn via osmosis. But we did not have cable television. I grew up on Long Island and we did not have cable until I was 17. So I was a big radio listener and I would listen to every sport. Whether it was hockey, basketball, football, baseball, all the New York teams. I even picked up Chuck Caton in the Hartford Whalers. We had one radio in the kitchen that would pick up the signal from Hartford. And I always tell Chuck the story. But to be honest, back then, hockey was my favorite. I loved all sports, but hockey was probably a little bit ahead of the others. And Howie Rose and Doc Emmerich and Sam Rosen were definitely the three. Also Barry Landers and Jiggs McDonald, who did the Islanders back in the day, great announcers. Larry Hirsch, the first couple of years of the Devils, I would listen to Larry and Fred Shiro on Devils games. But, Howie was a huge influence, and I know Neil and Howie were close as well, and we were all mutual friends, way back. But I actually, I worked for Howie during my college years. I was his associate producer of Mets Extra. So I'd be out at Shea Stadium with Howie until midnight at the home games. And I just learned so much from being around him. And he had just started doing some Rangers play-by-play at the time. So, he's certainly right up there, listening to Doc and Sam and also getting to know both of them, 30, 35, 40 years ago as friends as well. And, having traveled with the Rangers now for 29 years and sitting next to Sam on the plane, we were just together the other night. Coming home from Columbus. And, Doc Emmerich was a colleague during the years that I worked at NBC. We worked several Olympics together. I had my first opportunity to work in Olympics because Doc pulled out in 2002 when his dog got sick and he didn't want to leave his wife home alone for 2 or 3 weeks with the sick dog. So that was my first opportunity to work Olympic hockey. So those are the ones that that I grew up listening to that were big influences. I have to mention, Neil, just getting back to the Skipjacks days, and you guys were nice enough to mention my book. One of my favorite stories in the book, and this was one of the stories I used in my proposal, which was sent around to various publishers. As you know, Neil, having spent so much time in the AHL as well, and all the time you spent together on the bus and, with the team. And Barry Trotz was actually my road roommate for 2 years. He was our assistant coach, and he's gone on to become, right now the third winningest coach in NHL history. Joel Quenneville was on our team my first year. So I was on the bus with the second and third winningest coaches in the history of the league. Joel was wrapping up his playing career. Washington traded for him as a depth defenseman. He was sent down to Baltimore. But Rob Laird was our head coach. Barry was the assistant. And every year they'd play a prank on somebody, whether it was a player, a trainer, broadcaster, and they got me. I had done an interview with Barry early in the year, and something came out wrong. He flubbed a word. I don't even remember what it was, and I didn't use it on the air, but I made the mistake of playing the tape for some of the players. And the word got back to Trotz, and he and I, like I said, we roomed together to save money on the road. They had the broadcaster and the assistant coach. So for 2 years, we were road roommates. And he said, I'm going to get you back one day. Don't worry. So sure enough, I was the recipient of the fake arrest prank when we landed in Sydney, Nova Scotia to play the Cape Breton Oilers. And we got off the plane, and I was basically pulled into a small room and questioned, and they put me in a police car and drove me around for about 15 minutes, asking if my passport was valid, if I had anything illegal in my bag, if I knew anybody that was in trouble. And finally, they pulled up to what turned out to be the team hotel, and they said, we have one more question. Do you know Jimmy Wiseman? And as Neil knows, Jimmy was the longtime security officer for the Capitals, a great guy, the late Jim Wiseman, and his brother was the police chief up there in Sydney. He set up the whole thing. So Barry Trotz still loves talking about that story. Whenever we see each other, we had lunch in Nashville about a month ago, and that was one of the topics that came up.
That's amazing.
But those are the memories, right? Those are the things that you go through. I was 23 or 24 at the time, and Barry was 26 or 27, and here we are 3 decades later, still laughing about it.
And in those 3 decades, Kenny, you've seen so much, you've lived so much. What is the biggest change that you have seen as a broadcaster? Because obviously this industry has continued to evolve. I've been at it for 40 years. And so I've seen so many changes going back into the early to mid 80s. But how about you, from being a talent facing individual? What changes have you seen that are most stand out?
I think the technology is probably the biggest change. We talked about the preparation earlier, and you have everything available at the click of a keyboard. Any article you want to read, any game you want to watch, right? Back then, in preparing for games, you couldn't watch the team's previous game necessarily unless they were on national TV, right? Whether it's even the graphics on the games. When I started out, you didn't have the score and the time up in the upper left-hand corner for the entire game. That's something that came into play in the mid-90s. So I think the technology is the biggest thing that we've seen. Even the way the teams use it, the players, the coaches, the video, the iPads on the bench, right? I mean, who would have ever thought they'd be watching video of their previous shift while on the bench? So that's probably the biggest thing in my mind.
With that, we're going to circle back to hockey now. And Neil and I on Tuesdays typically do New York centric, covering the Rangers, Islanders, and Devils. But being that all the league schedules are now shut down until a week from Saturday, we're going to bake in a little New York centric here, given your familiarity with the New York area teams. And I'm going to start with the Rangers. And having, as you said, you know them like the back of your hand. But I don't believe that anybody could really speak to the inconsistency for the defending President's Trophy winning team. They did win 2 out of 3 over the past week. Beat Boston, the game that you called for TNT last Wednesday. had a really listless and intensity-free game against Pittsburgh on Friday, and then trailed in Columbus in the third period before scoring 2 goals to win the game. But from your seat, why has this club been so inconsistent, and they only seem to be able to react when their asses are on the burner, quite frankly?
Well, it's a great question. Every season's different, right? I mean, Neil would know this as well as anyone. The Rangers won the President's Trophy in 92, missed the playoffs in 93, and won the Cup in 94. That's an unbelievable swing, right? The 3-season swing as the Rangers went through back then. This year has been a bit of a whirlwind. They start 12-4-1. Then they go through that 4-15 stretch. Then they have a stretch where they pick up a point in 10 straight games. I look at this last week plus, Vic, and I'll even go back to the Vegas game. So 3-1 in the last 4. And in all 3 wins, they were trailing heading into the third period. So I think you have to give them a lot of credit for the resiliency. You're correct that the games didn't start maybe in the fashion that they would have liked. But they came back when trailing after the second period to beat Vegas, Boston, and Columbus. You're right about the Pittsburgh game. They probably would want that one back, but, set franchise records for wins and points last year. And this year they're in a race for a playoff spot, along with about 9 other teams for those 2 wild card spots. But I think the trade for JT Miller certainly adjusted the way the team plays. You could see Zibanejad and Panarin, when they're on his line, playing a little bit differently. And Zibanejad's had a real good stretch over these last 4 games, 8 points, since the trade. They pick up the big late goal from Cooley the other day to beat Columbus. So I think there's some real positives heading into this break. And they have 6 players going to the 4 nations, the 4 Americans, and then Zibanejad and Vakanainen. So that was a huge win the other day in Columbus, because if they had lost that game in regulation, there would have been a pretty big gap. But they narrowed it with the win, and we'll see what they can do coming out of the break.
Kenny, let's move over to where you were raised and where you grew up, albeit not as a fan of your local team. But the Islanders, of course, have they've had a very much of an injury-plagued season. They've got a lot of guys on the shelf, a lot of defensemen. Lou Lamoriello, the general manager, picked up, I think it's 3 now this season on waivers, three players on waivers to fill in for all the injuries that they've had. Now Barzal is out until we don't know when, with some knee surgery that he had. But they still come through last Tuesday and beat Vegas 2-1. Incredibly, I was at that game, and Sorokin was just amazing. They fall short in Winnipeg 4-3, albeit that they outshot the Jets right there in Manitoba, 19-6 in the third period. And then Saturday they fall short again on a back-to-back. They played in Winnipeg, then they got to go right into Minnesota, and they fall to Minnesota, who's another injury-plagued team, albeit 6-3. What do you make of the Islanders? And before you answer, are you going to be there on the 25th at UBS Arena? Because I will be there.
I will. Look forward to seeing you.
We'll see each other then.
I'll have the radio call on the 25th. You're right. Grew up on Long Island. Didn't necessarily root for those Islander teams, but had a lot of respect for them, and wound up working many games later on, in my broadcasting career as it got underway with Dennis Potvin and Bobby Nystrom. So, great guys personally, really enjoyed working with them. But as far as this year's Islander team, you have to give them a lot of credit for the way they played in January, early February, the 7-game win streak, despite all those injuries. Patrick Waugh had them playing really well. They bring in the 3 defensemen you talked about with D'Angelo, Perunovic, and Boquist off the waiver wire. D'Angelo coming back from Russia. But the core of the team is pretty similar to those teams that reached the back-to-back conference finals under Barry Trotz in the bubble in Edmonton. And then again the next year, when you think back to 2021, 1-0 Game 7 in Tampa, right? If they win that game, they're in the Cup final. So they had a real good stretch with this core group. Battle to make it into the playoffs last year, and they're right in that mix again, despite the injuries. So I think you have to give them a lot of credit. And I think you guys would agree. I always feel like when all three teams in the area make the playoffs, and it hasn't happened a lot in recent years, it just raises the excitement level, raises the amount of people that are paying attention to the sport of hockey, right? It's on the back page of the newspapers. People are talking about it on the radio. So not sure if it'll happen this year with all three, but, in my opinion, it just is great for the sport when all three teams in the area are doing well.
The team that looks like it is a shoo-in to make the playoffs among the three Metros, the New Jersey Devils, who win 2 out of 3 this week. They win in a shootout in Pittsburgh, although they did have a 2-0 lead that they let get away and wound up having to win in a shootout on a goal by Timo Meier. Then they get outshot 40-15 by the Vegas Golden Knights, a real flat effort, quite frankly, in a 3-1 loss, but then come back on Saturday, shut out the Canadiens 4-0. Jake Allen with his 4th shutout of the season. But this is a club that we've looked at and we've discussed with other guests that has kind of been somewhat inconsistent considering the upgrades that GM Tom Fitzgerald made, including a coaching change with Sheldon Keefe. So this club, I don't know if maybe because it appears that they're almost locked into a 2-3 with Carolina, they've just appeared to me to be having a little bit of a hard time finding their way this season to raise the level of consistency that they're going to need once we get to the playoffs in 2 months.
Well, I agree with you in that the upgrades they made have been a big part of it. When you look at the season they went through last year by bringing in Markstrom, I know he's out now, but that was a huge upgrade in goal. They didn't have the goaltending last year. And then the veteran defensemen, bringing in Pesce, bringing in Dylan, Kovacevic. Last year, some of those young defensemen, Hughes and Nemitz, were up on that first or second pair. And, I think Luke Hughes has taken a major step this year. He's played really well in the games that I've seen, both offensively and defensively. But having those veterans around, Pesce and Dylan, like I mentioned, and Markstrom in goal, that's been a major factor. We know they have the superstars up front with Hischier, Jack Hughes, Jesper Bratt, Timo Meier. So they're pretty set offensively. But the defensive part of the game, the goaltending was the issue last year. And if it is in fact Jersey, Carolina in that first round, you're going to have a real good team, go out in round 1, as we've seen with this format of the NHL. It's too bad that series can't be later on in the playoffs because, those should be 2 high level teams heading into the postseason.
Before we let you go, you were sharing a story before we started recording about the first time you heard about Neil Smith.
Well, I was a young hockey player growing up on Long Island. Twin Rinks in Port Washington was about 10 minutes from my house, and I would spend all day there on the weekends. We would go to my friends and I would go to a public skating session. They had these 5-hour public skating sessions, and then we'd stay for intramural hockey at about 4:00 in the afternoon. And then they also had something called puck shooting. They'd let the goalies in for free, and then anyone else would pay a couple of bucks and you get to shoot pucks on the goalies. So I was at Twin Rinks all the time. And right around the 80 Olympics, after the United States won in Lake Placid, you could tell, so many more kids started signing up for hockey, boys and girls. It went from, maybe a mid-level, amount of kids to, they didn't have enough space for everyone at that point. There were so many kids. There was such a boon in hockey on Long Island after the U.S. won that gold. And I remember walking in one day like it was yesterday, and there was a big sign up front, and it said, "Welcome, our new skating instructor, Neil Smith, New York Islanders draft pick." And that was the first time I ever heard the name. We drafted, was it 76, Neil? What year were we drafted?
74.
74.
74.
Because I remember I went home and looked you up in the NHL Guide and Record book. that day. But that was the first time I ever heard the name Neil Smith. He signed up. He was signed up as a skating instructor at Twin Rinks on Long Island, and then got to meet him a couple of years later in the press room at Madison Square Garden, as we alluded to earlier, and obviously became friends, and they were together with the Rangers for many years. But it all goes back to a rink that hasn't been there since the mid '80s, Twin Rinks in Port Washington, where we were first connected.
Yeah, and those were some fun days. Climbing the ladder. We can, all three of us can say this. Climbing the ladder is often a lot more fun than being on the top of the ladder. It's that journey that you go through to try to get to where we've all been. And you still are, Kenny, by the way. That is so much fun. And when you look back on it, you really get so much enjoyment out of looking back at that journey and thinking how great it was to get there. Ken, you've got the Stanley Cup Final this year. You're calling the Stanley Cup Final. We'll be watching and enjoying your call, as we always do. I just want to say something personal before you go, and that is that what makes you such a great human, as well as your dad, who I know very well, and is your humbleness and the good person that you are and the humble person that you are. And I often get it said about me, geez, I met Neil Smith last night. He's such a nice guy. And I think to myself, well, should I be a dick? Like, I mean, like I pride myself on being a nice guy, but people on the outside often assume that you are going to be some high and mighty ego guy because of what, of seeing what you've accomplished. And I got to admit, for the great broadcasters in the game that I watch with regularity, yourself being one of them, and many others, I can go on and on. Even Eddie O, who I had on the Ranger team. When I get to talk to you guys, I'm like, oh, wow, what a nice guy. Because again, you watch people on TV or you watch them from afar and you have this assumption that they're going to feel that they're as great as you think they are. And what really happens is when you talk to them, they're just great people and you're one of them.
Well, Neil, I really appreciate it. Appreciate the kind words. And yes, our crew is very fortunate to have the Cup Final again this year. I worked the Cup Final in 21 for NBC with Eddie, and 23 we were in Vegas, and it's every other year now. So along with Eddie and Brian Boucher and Jackie Redmond will be there this year. So can't wait. We actually have two of the games in the Four Nations next Monday in Boston. The Canada-Finland matchup, and then the United States and Sweden. So really looking forward to that as well. And thanks so much for having me on. Vic, it's been a while. We certainly used to see each other a lot back in the day. And Neil, February 25th, UBS Arena. I'll see you there.
We'll be there. You got to have dinner with me. Of course, you probably won't have dinner with me because you'll want to prepare more than you're already prepared. But if you can spare,
if you're there early enough, I might be able to sneak down.
I'm there at 6:00. So if you can spare some time at 6:00, we'll go and meet with Butch Goring. And of course, he'll be doing the game, I guess, because you're doing it for the radio.
Right. I'll be there for the radio that night.
And I see Butch and Brendan and Cal Clutterbuck.
By the way, Brendan and Darren Pang, they'll have the call this Wednesday in Montreal. Brendan Burke, who does a terrific job with the Islanders, they have the first game, Canada-Sweden, on TNT this Wednesday night.
A quick funny story about Brendan Burke. When I ran into him at the Islanders 3 years ago, and he does a tremendous call, I think. He reminded me that he was doing radio for the ECHL All-Star game when I was doing color way back when he was just, a lot younger. And I always laugh about things like that because here he is, a great voice, a great call. And it was the same kid that was doing radio for the ECHL. So great that careers get to grow like that. Kenny, thanks so much. Come on again, please. And whenever you can spare the time, we'd love to have you back.
I would love to. Thanks, Neil. Thanks, Vic.
Thank you, Kenny.